Let's start with give esteemed audience kind of, I promise never to summarize your book. So give esteemed audience kind of an overview of what they need to know about Wolf's Curse, which is either available now or available for pre-order, depending on when they're watching or listening.
Sure. So The Wolf's Curse is about a 12-year-old boy by the name of Gage, whose life is cursed when he discovers a great white wolf stealing his grandpapa's soul, preventing it from reaching the sea and the sky and sailing into eternity. Now, when the superstitious residents of his village catch him, they accuse him of crying wolf, and he ends up joining forces with another orphan by the name of Rue. And together, the two of them navigate their shared grief, and they end up on a journey that reveals really life-changing truths about the wolf, but also about the nature of death itself. The story is navigated by the omniscient wolf that you mentioned, and it has a voice maybe similar to Lemony Snicket, but more of a literary writing style, so it's been compared to A Wish in the Dark or The Girl Who Drank the Moon.
And so where you were starting to tell us the story of where the idea for this came from initially.
Yeah, so I had written 5 books before this story. And I was actually talking to a girlfriend over tea, and she said to me, you know, you have the skill set to write books. Why don't you write something that will actually sell? And I thought, what a great idea. Why don't I do that? So I went home and I was standing in front of my bookshelf and I was just searching for inspiration, and a beloved copy of The Book Thief jumped out at me. And for those of you who have never read it, this is a brilliant story set in Nazi Germany about a young girl who's sent to live with a foster family. But what really stands out about the story is the fact that it's narrated by Death. And I had read that story many times, but at that particular moment when I was looking for inspiration, I thought, that is just so brilliant. And what would that story look like if I told it? Because I can't write a story set in Nazi Germany. Number one, it's already been done. And number two, I don't want to do that. So if I take that same narrator, what would a middle grade story look like? And that's where the idea for The Wolf's Curse came from. So it all came from this idea of wanting to explore what death would look like as a narrator.
I never know, this is why I have other people talk about their books. I never know if it's a spoiler. There is a rather dramatic death in the first chapter, which is technically, I think, almost the inciting incident. So I think it's okay to talk about.
Absolutely.
How do you open a story with a death like that intended for younger readers, and how do you go about discussing a subject as dramatic as death with younger readers?
That's a great question. So in the first draft of The Wolf's Curse, when I first got this idea, I was so excited when it was time to sit down and start writing that I just sat down and pounded out a story in 30 days without doing any sort of pre-writing, without having any idea what it was going to be about. I just sat down and wrote to see what would come out. And I sent it off to a beloved reader, and she said, you know, the writing's beautiful, but the story isn't about death. Like, there's no death in your story. It was sort of all this wandering around. And I kind of meant for it to be like a humorous, funny adventure story. And maybe death would be trying to trick somebody into taking her job. So that's the vibe I was going for. And she's like, well, that just doesn't work. That's not the heart of the story. So I threw that story out completely and started over with a blank page. And I thought, unfortunately, she's right. I may not want to write about death, but if you're going to have death as a narrator, you probably need to have death in your story. And so I figured I would just hit it dead on, and no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, I'm not sure. But in any case, I thought, you know, I'm just going to need to jump in with a death. So I started with the wolf, and the wolf was walking down the street, and then I saw him meet this boy that I discovered was going to be my main character. And then, of course, the old man. And it just became very clear to me right away that the first thing that I needed to do was kill off the old man so that I could really grapple with this idea of grief and loss and what it means for a young person to suffer that kind of loss. And in terms of how to pull that off, it was really important to me that I offered the reader a look into their relationship so that they would feel what Gage was feeling when the old man died. And it was also really important to me to be really authentic about it. So my husband's father had died several years earlier, and I was privileged to do his hospice care, and I was at his side when he died. So I had been through that very personal experience. And that's something that I really wanted to show on the page, because we never know when a young person is going to experience that level of trauma. And I just thought that was something that hadn't been done before. So again, I wanted to hit it head on. I wanted to be really honest about the experience. And then I wanted to move on and really get into what the healing and the moving on process looks like after you experience a trauma like that.